Story 1. I was working as a stock clerk in a supermarket. When we had to fill the milk cooler, people would bust open a pack of 12 milk cartons and place them one by one. On my first day, I simply placed the pack in the cooler, cut the plastic on one side with my box cutter, and slid the cartons out. The store manager and the employee training me looked utterly bewildered. From that day on, everyone did it my way. Story 2. At the start of the lockdown, my 9-year-old son was receiving worksheets by email to complete at home. One day, I left him at the laptop working on math while I made dinner with my 3-year-old daughter. When I brought his dinner into the living room, I found him asking Alexa his math questions. Story 3. One summer, I worked as a laborer at a nursery. My daily tasks included manually watering 15,000 plants. I sketched a back-of-the-napkin plan to build an irrigation system and spent the next few weeks building it with some money from the owner. That system is still running 15 years later and now does all the work. I had automated myself out of the job and eventually had to find another one. A couple of years later, I earned my engineering degree. I am convinced engineers are inherently lazy people who will spend a disproportionate amount of effort to make things easier. Story 4. My brother-in-law spent a whole summer trying to figure out how to fix his sagging deck at the lake, which he could, in theory, crawl under and jack up. It would have been a tunneling project. It is a 60 by 60 area made entirely of long 2 by 6 boards. Massive. I sat there long. Enough, after a few beers, to come up with the idea of cutting a square out of the sagging area about 3 feet by 3 feet, jacking it up and rescrewing the boards. He paints the deck every spring with a roller anyway, so the square cut does not show. He thought I was a genius. I was just lazy. Story 5. We had to hold a thermometer in water in chemistry class. It was probably only a 20-minute experiment, but your arms get tired after a couple of minutes and you cannot let the thermometer touch the bottom of the pan or it will not get an accurate reading. So instead of just holding the thermometer, my laboratory partner built a contraption out of laboratory books and paper clips to hold the thermometer in the water without it touching the bottom. It was the most ridiculous thing you would ever see in a laboratory class, and our professor even walked over and said, "If it looks stupid, sounds stupid, but it works, then it is not stupid." My laboratory partner and I joke that he was not talking about the contraption but about my partner's intellect. Story 6. I had a math teacher who encouraged students to be as lazy as possible, defining lazy as actively looking for ways to do the least work. His logic was that mathematics can usually be simplified without changing the result. Someone just needs to be lazy enough to find the simplification. Story 7. I was a paid intern at a large company one summer while home from college. 95% of my work consisted of using systems, applications, and products in data processing, importing data into Microsoft Excel, cleaning data, and generating reports. Occasionally, I created a tool someone needed. In the first 2 weeks, after getting the hang of my responsibilities, writing all the Microsoft Excel formulas needed, and basically automating 99% of my work, I was relaxing. I went from actually working from 9 to 5 to maybe 1 hour a day. Finding, importing, cleaning, and reporting usually took hours, but with all the formulas it took 2 minutes of clicking. I then helped the other intern get his setup so we could both just relax. We could take 2-hour lunches paid for by the company, and nobody said anything because we were getting so much more done than the other interns. Of course, I helped with special tasks when asked, but those were simple 20-minute tasks building something in Microsoft Excel. Overall, it was the easiest, least stressful internship of my life. Story 8. The clerk was asked to bring 145 white papers into the office. He did not want to count them manually, so he printed the same number of blank sheets and brought them in. Story 9. Andrew Joachim, better known by his stage name Andy Kim, was a singer-songwriter who achieved success writing songs for bands such as the Archies, most notably Sugar. After that success, he coasted for a while until his record label dropped him for lack of output. He then created his own label and produced hits like Rock Me Gently. Major labels bought his label, assuming they would profit from his songs. He soon stopped writing and largely lived off the proceeds from the sale of his label. Work smarter, not harder. Story 10. It took me about 3 months to automate a data pipeline that extracts data, cleans it, and outputs an Excel file or a portable document format file for one of our clients. I walked over to talk with the account manager who assigns me tasks, and she told me we make $40,000 from that client every month for that automated job. I need to start my own business. Story 11. When Carl Friedrich Gauss, the famous German mathematician and physicist, was in elementary school around 1784, his class was assigned the busy work task of adding all the numbers from 1 to 100, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, and so on. This usually kept the class quiet for half an hour or so. 7-year-old Carl was sitting quietly with the correct answer, 50-50, while the rest of the class was just starting, so the surprised teacher asked him how he came up with the solution. He replied that he added 1 and 100 and got 101. Then he added 2 and 99 and got 101, 3 plus 98 equals 101, and so on. He realized there was a pattern of 50 pairs of numbers with each pair adding up to 101. And 50 times 101 equals 5,050. Story 12. When I was in college, I worked at an Italian fast food place known for its breadsticks. They came frozen and needed to thaw, so we would take a giant aluminum baking sheet measuring 3 by 4 feet, spread the sticks out in a single layer with no gaps, cover the sheet with a plastic bag, and leave it in the walk-in refrigerator overnight. The next day you had to use a pair of tongs to move each stick to a new tray, turning them over, then cover the new tray with the bag and let the sticks sit on racks for a couple of hours before brushing on the garlic butter sauce. The task was so tedious that you were usually ready to brush butter on the first tray as soon as you finished turning the last one. One morning, when I was assigned this task for the first time, I did not want to deal with it. Realized that if I placed the second tray upside down on top of the first, then flipped them and removed the first tray, the results were the same. I surprised the boss when I completed the 3-hour job in about 15 minutes. I received a raise of 5 cents per hour. Story 13. I was once assigned to test a piece of equipment on a ship. The test involved attaching each unit to a reader and running many command line instructions. Then one had to copy all the text, paste it into Microsoft Word, and save it as a poorly formatted report. There were hundreds of units, and they needed to be tested several times a year. We did about 20 to 30 a day. It would take several weeks to finish. I did not know how to code at the time, but I wanted to learn. Within 2 months, I had written a program, including a graphical user interface to spot faults easily instead of reading the reports. The program could read 3 units at a time and automatically create a well-formatted portable document format report and save it on our server using the serial number and date as the file name. The job became attaching 3 units, waiting about 3 minutes, then replacing them. Basically 30 seconds of work and a 3-minute wait. I could now test all the units in a day, though I typically spread the work over a couple of days. When I left the company, I left the program on the test computer. A few months later, a former colleague emailed me saying they were using the program on several ships. There was no manual, of course, but it was so straightforward that one was not needed. Story 14. If I need directions, I'm not asking someone with one tooth. I'm asking a one-legged person because they know the easiest way to get there. If there is a shortcut, a one-legged person will know where it is, and you will not be hopping fences either. Story 15. Eating dinner from the pot so there are fewer dishes to wash. Story 16. An older company had a person dedicated to data entry, which boiled down to copying and pasting portions of data from text files into a spreadsheet and formatting them into a report. The person originally doing this job spent more than 40 hours per week doing it, but was not very computer literate. When she retired, the company hired someone with actual skills. The new hire convinced management to let her work remotely after getting up to speed on the job. She spent the first week at home automating the entire job. She spent the remainder of her multi-year tenure doing whatever she wanted, except for the 10 to 15 minutes per week required to run her program and answer the occasional email, all while receiving full salary and benefits. She actually had to introduce a few errors now and then to make it seem realistic. Story 17. I worked in a local adult education center. One of my main tasks was to calculate how many people enrolled in a course, how many of them received discounts, for example, unemployed people, the gender and age distribution, and so on. This information was needed to calculate upcoming course fees. That was my only work there, and I hated it. This was in the early 1990s, so personal computers were available in our offices, but I had no idea how to write a program or use a database to process this information. Fortunately, our center had an interesting policy. If you wanted to educate yourself, you could attend the class for free. If it occurred during work time, it counted as work time, provided my supervisor approved. She approved. So I spent 3 months studying database structures, scripting, and coding. I told my tutor what I wanted to do, and he helped me write a script that grabbed all necessary information from the course database and copied it into another database. Then I wrote code that was a bit wild. I implemented what-if scenarios using filters. At the end, I was able to finish work that had required 6 hours a day within 15 minutes. Before that, it took, for example, an hour to gather all the necessary information to answer questions such as how many unemployed single-parent women would be needed for a course to break even. After my work, I had everything. Later, you could request statistics such as how many single-parent, disabled, foreign women aged 80 to 90 would be needed over the next 2 years to keep an ornithology course running. The script produced the answer instantly. After that, I started the personal computer in the morning, grabbed all the data, ran my script, and was done within 15 minutes. I then read the book I had brought from home. At the end of the day, I gave my supervisor dozens of papers, statistics, and predictions, told her that I had done a lot of work, and went home. My supervisor was very happy with me because I had become much more productive and highly effective. Story 18. I worked in the goods receiving department for an aircraft manufacturer as a summer job while at university. When parts arrived, we opened them and entered the details into a terminal. That was long-winded. I discovered the terminal keyboard had assignable shortcuts and set up shortcuts for boilerplate entries, so entering an item required about 6 keystrokes. That saved my coworker and me hours every day, which we used to prank each other, warehouse colleagues, and staff at other sites. Story 19. I had a manager in my 20s who detested that I turned a 2-hour process into a 15-minute process. It exposed how much lazier he was than I was, because when the higher-ups learned from others at my level that I had created the program, they took me aside and told me he had taken credit for it. They asked how I felt about that. I told them their decision about the manager's character was theirs to make and asked them to put themselves in my shoes. They did nothing, so I took the concept to a competitor that invested in making the program more robust and proprietary. My name was first on the patent and trademark documents, and I did well enough to semi-retire at 45. I credit Lee Iacocca for the inspiration. He went through a similar problem with higher-ups at Ford and answered by taking his talents to Chrysler, where he was valued. Story 20. Back in high school, a lot of kids used to walk through his park to get home or to school. A portion of the path cut into the woods because it was quicker than following the official trail. At one point in the walk through the woods, you had to climb a small but tedious hill. It was nothing major, but it took about 10 seconds of hard effort to get up. You could not go around it because one side dropped to the creek below and the other side had dense trees. One summer, a group of us decided to dig through the hill to make it flat. It took about 14 of us 3 full days to get through. Those 3 days were hard, but definitely worth it. We saved 10 seconds of hill climbing every morning and afternoon, more than 150 days of the year, and it was not just us but hundreds of other kids who took the same path every day. Sometimes you need to put in a lot of work so your future selves can enjoy the easy way out. Story 21. I was invited to my friend's yearly apple picking. It was a full day of picking apples, watching children, and filling a truck for cider. I was lazy and suggested we make the process more efficient by using tarps on the ground. We managed in 2 hours what historically took all day. We did not even get to the picnic lunch. In the end, I ruined apple picking. Story 22. Walkie-talkies make the workday far less labor-intensive when used correctly. Story 23. Hopefully this has not been posted yet. In order to restart a server, they made a robot that would eject its compact disk tray every time the server could not be pinged. Story 24. In Australia, explorers discovered a mountain taller than Mount Kosciuszko, which had been thought to be the country's highest peak. Rather than cause confusion by announcing a new highest peak, they simply named the new mountain Mount Kosciuszko and renamed the original. Story 25. Sounds like Hanlon's razor. German General Kurt von Hammerstein-Equord used Hanlon's razor to assess his officers, saying, "I divide my officers into 4 groups. There are clever, diligent, stupid, and lazy officers. Usually 2 characteristics are combined. Some are clever and diligent, and their place is the general staff. The next lot are stupid and lazy. They make up 90% of every army and are suited to routine duties. Anyone who is both clever and lazy is qualified for the highest leadership duties because he possesses the intellectual clarity and composure necessary for difficult decisions. One must beware of anyone who is stupid and diligent. He must not be entrusted with any responsibility because he will always cause only mischief." Story 26. I have a large year-end exercise to complete for accounting. My work was previously checked by another manager who spent over 3 weeks reviewing the data. Eventually, she moved to another department and that workload fell to me. I performed a self-audit and then presented the data to the external auditors. My previous manager was not skilled with Microsoft Excel. I did the audit in a separate file using simple but unconventional formulas. I reduced the task from 3 weeks to near real-time checks. When I was told I had to perform that exercise every month, the job became easy. I automated the process using the sumifs function, the index function, max value checks, and range checks. Living the dream. Sorry if I rambled. Story 27. At work, I go through parts and apply 2 different kinds of tape and 2 different kinds of weave. I have finally got the rhythm down, and now I do each part individually and apply everything at once. Everyone else completes an entire order applying tape, then goes through it again to do the weave. I asked to use the big table in the back of the shop and put all the tape and weave tools there so I can do the parts all at once. The normal rate for an 8-hour shift is 1,200, but I can manage 1,800 in a day at a steady pace. I can reach 1,800. I have done it before. Most days I work more slowly and intentionally make about 1,300 to 1,350 parts to earn my incentive bonus. Because I work consistently, supervisors leave me alone at the table in the back. They look the other way when I have an earbud in one ear, and they do not notice that I scroll an online forum or read a lot. I cannot say what products we make. They are too recognizable, and searching online would reveal where I work and live. Story 28. I knew a man who had a low-level data and reporting job. He had several daily and weekly responsibilities, including many reports that required significant tweaking from raw data to finished product. He was in a low-level position. We did not find out until much later that he had set up macros for each of his major responsibilities where possible. Once configured, he would run the macros to produce his work, and he would intentionally delay delivering the reports until just before the deadlines. He completed every assignment and was seen as reliable. He also complained about the workload so that people would leave him with that work. I doubt he worked a full hour a day after setting up those automations. Eventually, he left for a job with better pay. He worked lazily. He was smart not to reveal his automation because if he had told them, he might have received praise and then been assigned a lot more work in addition to maintaining those macros and so on. He milked the job rather than the job milking him. Story 29. One of my favorite stories from my youth was the tale of the man who was too lazy to fail. I got fed up with handwriting itemized suborders at work, so I set up a spreadsheet you can fill out. I was tired of having more than one program open and not being able to search within and among those order sheets, so I had our FileMaker developer integrate it into our ordering and invoicing system. I was frustrated with sorting a giant pile of paper invoices from an unpaid stack to a paid stack every month, so I now use accounting software to keep track. I became so irritated with filling out a multi-page printed form for every order, sometimes for a single item, that I condensed the items into a list of most used items on one easy-to-read sheet and asked my coworker to write uncommon items at the bottom. I hate busy work, and paper invariably leads to busy work. I have tried to reduce paper use in our office but have not been entirely successful. We keep written order forms available when orders arrive too fast to type quickly and correctly, and we must retain some paper records for things like Organic, Food and Drug Administration, and United States Department of Agriculture audits. All in all, my strong dislike of filing has reduced busy work here by at least half. Story 30. I automate routine tasks at work to make daily jobs easier. I write manuals with screenshots and arrows showing where to click and what to fill in. When I write a manual, I assume the reader has no prior knowledge, so when customers call with common questions, I simply send them the online manual I created. This eliminates the need to retype explanations or repeat them by phone. Story 31. Do Alexander and the Gordian knot count? The Gordian knot was a complex knot that, according to prophecy, could be undone only by the one destined to rule Asia, and it was cut, rather than untied, by Alexander the Great. Story 32. My boss put my name forward to lead a project group shortly after I joined the company. I had no project management experience, yet he still asked me to lead a group of 12 people. They were much smarter, with technical backgrounds and far more tenure at the company. I am a business person who is not comfortable with balance sheets, which is why I work in human resources and because I like the field. At the first meeting, I asked for everyone's plans, experience, and ideas, gathered pros and cons, cross-checked with the budget, set a timeline with milestones to reach in about 6 months, and identified people to consult at different steps. I did that because I like organizing things, keeping everyone on the same page, and delegating tasks. The project succeeded and I was promoted. I asked my boss why he chose me since I had never done anything like that. He said it was because in the first week I pointed out that most of the work was poorly structured, with no clear guidelines, and that this could be improved if we took the time to organize it. He also said I disliked asking questions when I did not get clear answers. Asking 10 people the same question would yield 15 different answers. In the long run, organizing would make us much more efficient and keep everyone aligned. It all started because I hated disorganized work. Story 33. Years ago, as a student, I got a job stocking shelves. The men were carrying heavy boxes, putting them on the floor, and bending each time to pick up items to put on the shelves. I weighed about 100 pounds, and carrying the boxes exhausted me. One day I had an idea. I put a box on an old desk chair and rolled it around. No more carrying and no more bending. Instead of doing the same, most of the men called me lazy and kept carrying the heavy boxes to prove how strong they were. Now they have special rolling carts to do the job. Story 34. I browsed the entire miscellaneous kitchen tools section at Bed Bath & Beyond. I don't need an avocado slicer, a lemon squeezer, or an automatic chopper and dicer, but lazy old me definitely puts them to good use. Story 35. My brother gave my oldest nephew $10 a week if he did all his chores without needing to be told or complaining. One day he got home early from work and saw the neighbor's kid tossing a bag into the trash. He asked what he was doing, and the kid said he got $5 a week to take care of a few chores. My nephew had outsourced his chores. Story 36. Well, I worked in a graphic design studio as an intern. They mostly had me practice and do basic tasks their head designers were too busy to handle. One project was a real estate ad. It had a few basic templates, but they were scatterbrained. I would spend 5 to 10 minutes trying to find the right layer for each picture and had to adjust far too much. So I made copies of the files and created one file for each template. I labeled everything and arranged the images so the layers would not clip into the lower ones, enabling someone to complete the template in 2 to 3 minutes. I showed my boss the difference. He looked surprised and said the next day that if I were a graduate he would hire me because I was better than the people applying. In short, I turned an overly complicated, disorganized system into a streamlined process, and my boss was disappointed he could not hire me. Story 37. When I was a kid, I had to carry groceries into the house. I didn't want to make multiple trips, so I tied several bags to the belt loops on my pants and carried them in one trip. Story 38. I'm doing automated data cleaning in Python right now. My coworkers do not know about it, so something that takes me 10 minutes at most takes them 2 hours. For those who asked me to share my code, I set up a private GitHub repository for my team. Some have used it, but others, including management, have not adopted it. I think they feel a little threatened. Story 39. A few years ago, my sister was doing hardware testing and validation. She was working with a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. When she learned I was automating Excel spreadsheet creation and editing at my job, she asked me to write a script for her. What took 2 to 3 days of eye-straining, tedious work was reduced to 20 seconds. She kept it a secret for a while, and the worst task became the best. She eventually shared the script with the company because many others did similar work, and she was promoted. In conclusion, her laziness helped her get a promotion. Story 40. I worked for the state doing data entry. We received scans of forms that people had filled out, and we had to make sure the numbers the computer pulled from the scans matched what was written, since it was not entirely accurate. The software showed all the scanned documents and overlaid fields next to every place the scanner found numbers, with the number the machine had determined already in the field. The job was to check each field and make sure the number next to it matched. If it did not, correct it. We did not alter any of the text, only the numbers. The scans included all the paperwork submitted by each person, including many pages with no data that were informational sections at the beginning and middle of the packet. My trainer showed me the workflow. Accept a new document from the queue, press the down arrow key to scroll through the beginning section until reaching the first field. Verify the numbers, and repeat. He accepted a new document, scrolled through the beginning, verified several fields, then excused himself and told me to ask if I had questions. From my station I could see everyone scrolling. Some used the mouse wheel, most used the down arrow. I accepted a new document and pressed the tab key. The program immediately brought me to the first field a dozen pages down. I compared the field to the written text and used tab to move from field to field, confirming each number. I did go back and scroll through the whole document later to ensure I had not missed anything due to a software issue. Near the end of my second day, my boss called me into his office and asked what I had been doing. By day 2, I was processing 5 or 6 times the number of documents per day compared to people who had been there for years. He assumed I was just clicking through new documents without doing any work. I told him that if he reviewed my work, he would see everything was fine. He pulled one of my finished documents at random, scrolled through it, and admitted it was correct but said it would take hours for his assistant manager to review all my work. I asked if I could show him something and requested another random document. He rolled his eyes but complied. I stood up, came around the desk, and hit tab. He watched like it was witchcraft. I showed him the field matched and tabbed through the rest, confirming each number. I finished reviewing the whole document with him in less than a minute. He asked if my trainer had shown me that. I said he had not. It was a universal keyboard shortcut I had been using since the early 1990s. This happened in 2013. He said he had to talk to his assistant manager and asked me to go back to work. Later, as I was leaving for the day, he called me to his office and fired me for not taking the job seriously and for potentially causing delays to taxpayers due to inaccuracies. I laughed. That is the story of how I managed to flummox several state employees with the tab key. Story 41. According to Facebook parents, the person who carved a sphere out of a stone block and rolled it instead of pushing it like the others. Story 42. Water is very lazy and will find the easiest way to go anywhere. Story 43. An engineer spent hours developing a program so they could start the coffee pot from their desk and not wait for it upon arriving in the break room. Story 44. My ex-boss gave me an Excel sheet with 124,000 rows. It contained all the company's customer data, with each row duplicated. Some of those duplicates contained errors. She asked me to go through the list row by row, checking for mistakes and marking all faulty entries. She wanted me to do that using the down arrow key and the mouse. I thanked her, sat down, and spent half an hour searching online. I copied and pasted parts of various formulas until I figured out the right one. I double-clicked the tiny rectangle so the formula was applied to all rows. It worked like a charm. I stood up, got a coffee, talked with colleagues, then went to my boss. She had expected the task to take 3 days. When I returned in less than an hour, she assumed I either had not understood the task or had follow-up questions. I will never forget her expression when I told her I was done. There were 6 faulty entries. A year and a half later, I enrolled in a computer science program at university, and I will finish my undergraduate degree this summer. Story 45. There's a repo on GitHub containing code based on scripts that were used by a tech employee that his coworkers discovered after he left the company. Here's a summary of his shenanigans. Edit. Repo code is based on the story, not actually from this person. Okay, so our build engineer left for another company. He was literally living inside the terminal, the type of person who loves Vim, creates diagrams in Dot and writes wiki posts in Markdown. If anything requires more than 90 seconds of his time, he writes a script to automate it. So we were looking through his legacy. You're going to love this. Smack dash my dash bitch dash up sach. Sends a text message saying late at work to his wife. It randomly picks reasons from a predefined list. Runs as a cron job. The job triggers if there are active secure shell sessions on the server after 9 p.m. with his login. Kumar-asshole.sh scans the inbox for emails from Kumar, a database administrator at a client. It searches for keywords like help, trouble, sorry. If it finds keywords, the script connects via secure shell to the client server and rolls back the staging database to the latest backup. Then it sends a reply, no worries, mate. Be careful next time. Hangover.sh, a cron job scheduled for specific dates, sends automated emails such as not feeling well or going to work from home, adding a random reason from a predefined list. It runs if there are no interactive sessions on the server at 8:45 a.m. Fucking-coffee.sh waits exactly 17 seconds, then opens a telnet session to the coffee machine. We had no idea the coffee machine was on the network, ran Linux, and exposed a transmission control protocol socket. It sends a command such as sysbrew. The machine starts brewing a mid-sized half-CAF latte and waits another 24 seconds before pouring it into a cup. The timing matches how long it takes to walk from the developer's desk to the machine. Holy shit, I'm keeping those. Story 46. I don't know whether this is a true story, but it fits your request. There was a manufacturing plant that made toothpaste. One year, for some reason, there were an unusually high number of empty boxes being shipped. To stop that, the head of the company hired a couple of engineers to develop a system to catch any empty boxes so they would not be shipped with the boxes that actually contained toothpaste tubes. The engineers developed a system that stopped the line if a box weighed below a certain amount, requiring a worker to remove the box and restart the line. The person in charge loved the idea and implemented it immediately. Right away, the number of empty boxes shipped dropped to near zero. The head of the company went to see the system in action. He noticed a huge fan by the assembly line. Confused because it was not hot, he asked the plant manager why the fan was there. The plant manager said the workers were tired of stopping the line to remove an empty box. So they hooked up a fan to blow the empty boxes off the scale before the system recognized them as empty and shut everything off. In the end, laziness led to a more efficient and cost-effective plan. Story 47. Every winter in Canada, power lines would fail because of the weight of snow. It took many days for enough snow to build up to break a line, so they employed a team to walk the routes and shake the poles to loosen the snow. One day they saw a bear shaking the poles. They realized that if the bear could do the work, the team would not need to walk the route. They gave one man a bucket of honey and he walked the route, painting the sides of the poles to attract bears. This worked for a few years, but it still took a lot of time. Then they had the idea of flying a helicopter along the route with a trained sniper using honey paintballs to shoot the poles. On its maiden flight, the helicopter passed the lines and the downdraft blew away all the snow. The flights continue to this day, but without the sniper. Story 48. My greenhouse watering system is simple. I used to spend 1 hour per day watering the garden, 30 hours per month. For $50, I set up a polyvinyl chloride watering system in a few hours. Now I simply turn on the outdoor faucet and watch while I smoke a joint. Story 49. The engineer who fixed the tracklink problem on Russian T-34 tanks added a metal plate to the side of the tank to push the links back into place instead of redesigning the tracks. Story 50. Programming away work is the real-life example of this. Story 51. I worked with a man named Ethan who was unfortunately scapegoated for a project's failure and was let go, although he was capable. A year later, the company I worked for was sold and eventually closed. While looking for new work, I spoke with a recruiter who had also worked with Ethan. He said he was trying to find Ethan a new position, because Ethan had a contract to digitize and update old mechanical drawings to the company's new software. Apparently, Ethan wrote a number of macros, set up a workflow, and completed the work within a month, even though the contract was for 6 months. The company let him go because the work was finished and they had no intention of keeping him. Story 52. My wife and I have a chore list. I am now responsible for vacuuming, which she gloated about not having to do because it was so time-consuming. I bought a Roomba. The house is cleaner than ever, and all I have to do is press a button on my phone. Story 53. The polymerase chain reaction changed biological and medical sciences more than any other breakthrough in modern times. It came about because a scientist wanted to surf more, so he figured out how to perform a full-time laboratory job in just a few hours a week. Love him. Story 54. Frank B. Gilbreth made the original remark after watching lazy bricklayers work more efficiently. Story 55. In construction, it is common to have a soft foreman or foreman under the person in charge. You identify individuals who want to advance and assign them portions of the work and the crew they need. They will complete it because it often means less physical labor for them. You still sign off on their work and resolve disputes, which makes you the ultimate supervisor, but you can assign tasks and they will notify you when the work is done and the schedule is being followed. Story 56. I used to work in information technology providing technical support for employees. We did not have a process for tracking what programs and hardware each employee personal computer had. When a personal computer needed replacement, we had to remotely access the old device to retrieve programs, shared folders, and hardware information. If the old personal computer failed, we had to rely on the user to know what they needed. I created a simple one-page form to record the user, personal computer specifications, installed programs, and connected hardware. When setting up a new personal computer, you only need to copy the information from the form. Story 57. Programming. A lazy programmer will consider all the possible ways to do a simple task. Story 58. I read about a Texas airport that had a high rate of complaints from passengers who had to wait a long time for their luggage at baggage claim. The solution was to assign a more distant baggage claim area for the same flights. Passengers walked farther, but complaints fell sharply because they did not have to wait as long. Story 59. I asked my husband to take out roughly a dumpster's worth of trash. He spent about an hour building a sled out of it and carried it out in one trip. He is the laziest man I have ever met. Story 60. I created mainframe automation so that if there was a problem, I would be paged to my boss's office where I played Doom, the video game, for hours and browsed newsgroups. Yes, I am old. Story 61. Information Technology Department. Sure, I could do that task, or I could write a script and automate it. Story 62. I worked in a library scanning incoming books into the system. The job required frequently transferring piles of books between stations. My coworker constantly called me lazy because I would not get out of my chair while working. I had to explain, first, that wheelchairs are for that purpose, and second, that I was at least 3 times faster than she was at the same task, partly because it was more efficient not to get up every 2 minutes. Story 63. During my information technology consulting days at a managed service provider, we had a client with about 180 users who needed 40 personal computers prepared for a round of new hires. I was assigned the ticket and my boss quoted 80 hours of work, 2 hours per personal computer. The standard procedure my boss had set up was a 3-page checklist to run through for each personal computer. Which software was needed for each group, reminders to install updates since Dell workstations are not always current out of the box, and other tasks. It was a long, manual approach to Windows deployment. Instead of following the standard procedure, I decided to automate it. The first 2 days I unboxed one personal computer, prepared it with the basics needed for all workstations, and cloned it to another computer. On day 3 I built off that image, adding specialized software for a specific subgroup of the new hires. Once that was complete, I was ready to deploy. I configured the Windows Deployment Services server role and had everything ready. I brought in a 24-port switch, hooked all personal computers up for 2 rounds of 20 deployments, and by lunch on day 4 I had all workstations complete. My bosses had been checking in because I only had 2 computers prepared at the end of day 3. After lunch on day 4, I informed them the job was finished. They told me to hang out at the client's office for the next week, which gave me downtime to work on other things. Story 64. I am printing and wiring a safety switch that will disable my lathe when the chuck key is removed. The rule is that the chuck key must only be in the chuck while tightening it. Although I have never forgotten to remove the key, I decided to ensure it is never left in the chuck by preventing the machine from starting unless the key is inserted in the switch. Story 65. I am a real-life example of this. Wow, you do amazing work. You must work so hard. Now, step 1 of any new job or task is workflow efficiency. I let them continue to think I am working hard while I browse Reddit. Story 66. Mail delivery. It was a lazy person who came up with the idea of centralized mailboxes in each neighborhood instead of individual mailboxes at each house. Story 67. Did anyone mention the man who altered a ship's course because the sun was in his eyes? Story 68. My friend applied for a job at a company that develops autonomous driving systems for cars. During the interview, he was asked whether he liked cars. He said he absolutely hated driving. He got the job. Story 69. One time I asked my boss, "Seriously, why do you always assign me the difficult tasks?" He replied, "Because I know you will get them done quickly, so you can get your ass back on Reddit." Story 70. Before it was shut down entirely, I was able to privately tour the coal power plant in southeastern Virginia. At one point during the tour, the guide told me to watch out for a cord on the floor. The cord ran to a small window air conditioning unit that was duct taped to a vent. Supposedly, one day the plant began to overheat and would have to be shut down to repair the malfunction. There were emergency reserves for situations like this, but the plant was overheating faster than they could switch over. Someone at the plant had just purchased an air conditioning unit and had it in the back of their vehicle. They ran and grabbed it, plugged it in, and pointed it into one of the vents. The cool air it produced was enough not only to offset the overheating but also to re-regulate the system. Instead of repairing the issue, they fixed the air conditioning unit in place and let it run continuously until the plant shut down. Story 71. When Peter the Great was building St. Petersburg, a huge boulder needed to be removed because it was in the way of a road. Many contractors tendered for the job. They planned to use explosives, smash it into smaller pieces with sledgehammers, and cart them away. A local peasant submitted a bid for half the price. They gave him the job. He and a few friends dug a large hole beside the boulder, removed the excess earth, tipped the boulder into the hole, and covered it with the remaining soil. Story 72. At my last job at a truck suspension shop, we did inventory every December and someone had to count all the washers and screws of every size. It was my first inventory. I casually suggested weighing 10 screws or washers, then weighing the entire lot and dividing the total weight by the sample weight to get the count. Everyone looked at me as if I had given them the key to the universe. Counting washers and screws went from a day or two to just an hour. Story 73. I used to animate graphics for those light-emitting diode signs at certain popular fast food chains. There was sometimes a library of 80 to 126-second videos that needed to be resized. I created a system macro that recorded my mouse clicks and keystrokes, automating a task that previously took 4 hours and letting me start sketching ideas for other projects with a single button. Story 74. Information technology is the king of this. We have set up scripts to perform many tasks for reporting and data manipulation automatically. We have used one macro program for years that works flawlessly most of the time. It can recognize windows and screens and can be instructed to perform almost any task. This is called Macro Express. When Farmville was popular on Facebook, you had to click each square in a grid to harvest fields, and pineapple fields were especially valuable. I wrote a macro assigned to a hotkey that, when I found a full field to harvest, moved the mouse cursor and clicked every square in the grid so no one else could harvest it. It clicked the entire grid in about 5 seconds. Manually, it took about 30 seconds. I also used it on voting websites before they implemented measures to limit 1 vote per Internet Protocol address. You can do many things if you are willing to spend the time to perfect your script. Story 75. Every invention in the last 100 years shows how to accomplish tasks with much less effort. The automobile comes to mind first. Story 76. I use the talk-to-text feature on my phone to write essays. I speak what I want and then correct the grammatical errors. Work smarter, not harder. Story 77. In my teens, I started working at a local grocery store and was hired in the deli and bakery department. Every morning, one person made salads, two people brewed the fresh gallon jugs of sweet tea, and two people prepared the ready-to-go meals for the deli counter. One week, a bad case of the flu hit and we were severely short-staffed. I grabbed a grocery cart and started brewing tea. While it brewed, I made the salads. Instead of carrying each gallon of tea to the other side of the store one at a time, I placed them in the cart and continued brewing and stacking until the cart was full to avoid walking back and forth. Usually by the time it was full, I was finished with all morning prep and was able to help the cook make breakfast and prepare for lunch. The manager saw this and made it my full morning job. Unfortunately for my coworkers, most were then let go. I only knew of one person who was moved to another job in the store. I ended up leaving shortly after because of the backlash. In summary, I did the work of 5 people by multitasking with only a shopping cart and accidentally caused others to lose their jobs. Story 78. I used to work in a car dealership parts department and repeatedly stocked the same products like items for oil changes. I made a keystroke shortcut. Now, as a forklift driver at Costco, I make sure there's always something on my forks when I enter or exit an aisle. Unlike other drivers, I do. That's common sense. Story 79. I was senior patrol leader in Scouts, and we were doing a trail cleanup. There were many large limbs and thin trunks from aspen trees. One scout was very large for his age, over 6 feet tall and at least 200 pounds. He usually carried a single item but used both hands because he considered himself lazy. I assigned him to limb and trunk removal. He used a timber hitch and cleared 3 to 4 limbs or trunks at a time. He liked it because he only had to tie a knot and walk, and it freed 3 other scouts for different tasks. We kept a good pace. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.